All right, well, we'll make a start. My name's Rob Vega. I'm the Manager of Career Development, and I just wanted to say congratulations to all you guys for choosing to come along today, because I think it means that you're really serious about your job search. So before we start, I'd just like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people and their elders past and present, who are the traditional custodians of the land of which we are on, the Swinburne's Australian campuses, and located in Melbourne's east and the outer east. Okay, so before we start, I'd like you just for a start to introduce yourself to the person next to you, shake hands and say hi. If you're not next to anyone, you might want to just move along and turn around to someone who's behind you. Okay, that's good, that's good. So, we've got a fair bit on today, so we'll get going, and you'll get some more chances to talk to each other later on with a bit of networking that we'll be doing. I'd just like to introduce the rest of our team, the other presenters. We've got Peter Foligno.
Morning.
And Denise Mooney.
Hi.
And I'd also like to thank Tina Papadakis, who's put a lot of work into getting today together, but she's had to go home because she's not feeling well. And also thank Julia and Jade and David who are out there for all the work that they've done putting this together. Okay, now just to get a bit of an idea, I want to sort of get an idea who's here. If you're doing an undergraduate degree, can you put your hand up? Okay. If you're doing a postgrad? Got a couple of postgrads? Okay. What about if you're a local student? Hands up. If you're international? A couple of people on the fence, maybe, I don't know. And just in terms of which faculty, who's from business and law? Okay, a few. Who's from health, art and design? Yeah, and FSET. Is that all the faculties? We've got, okay, so we've got a bit of a mix there. Okay, so I just want to give you briefly an outline of what we're doing today. And look, we hope you'll get a lot out of it. And as I said, well done for coming along and getting some help. Bit of an introduction at the moment. We're going to talk about, the first session is going to be about sourcing work and how you get it. Denise is going to talk about that. We're going to have a very short break, and then we're going to talk about applying for work, the application process. Then we're going to have the highlight of the day, a bit of pizza for lunch, which will be good. And look, after lunch, I think it's a really important session. We've got a person who's a graduate recruiter from Dixon Recruitment coming along, and she's going to, she's going to talk about what they look for in graduates in their recruiting process, and an opportunity for you guys to ask her some questions too. Just to say that all of us are very experienced in careers and in careers practitioners, and also had a lot to do with graduate recruiting, so hopefully there'll be a lot of really useful information. And look, the last part of the day, the do session, is the recruiters there, but also we're going to be, our whole team's going to be here to help you. So it's an opportunity to get some face-to-face help with your resume, for example. So hopefully maybe you've got your resume somewhere, or you could print it out, or any questions that you've got. Now normally most of our resume process is an online process, so that's a really good opportunity to get some one-to-one feedback on your resume. So that'll be the last part of the day. So that's what we're doing today. So just an idea, you've probably got a bit of an idea of the services that we offer. We've got a number of services. Some of them are online, some of them are face-to-face. And this gives you an idea. We've got career consultations, so we're all qualified careers counsellors, have a seat. And you can do one-on-one 30-minute sessions, face-to-face, phone or online, and through talking about individual situations in order to develop some career action plans. So it might be a variety of things that you might want to see us about. We've also got the Fast Track service, which is the online service. We're using, it's on Blackboard, and you can send in your resume, cover letter, LinkedIn profile. We'll have a look at it, and make some suggestions. You can send it in more than once if you need to. We've got workshops like today, building skills, things like behavioural interviews, your LinkedIn profile or resume, employability skills, job search strategies and applications. So we have them throughout the year. We've got student conferences or seminars where we've got employers coming along, employer panels, and it's really good always to hear from employers. So we've got our recruiter after lunch, which will be really useful. We've also got a jobs board, and that's on Swinny, called Swinny Employ. And to book into this workshop today, you needed to go onto Swinny Employ, so you'll know where that is. And you know, there's a lot of different vacancies from part-time, volunteering, professional roles, internships, you name it, they're there. And we've also got a lot of online resources. So when you book this workshop today, there's a section called Swinny Employ Plus, and there's a lot of information. There's a lot of online resources there. This gives you a bit of an idea of some of the. There's a whole lot of stuff, and we'll be covering some of the resources that we've got. All the way from videos, informational handouts, interview simulator, templates for building resumes and cover letters, and a variety of things. So I would just, I guess the message is to you people that are maybe almost graduating, how many people are finishing this year? Quite a few, okay. Well, the good news is our services are available to you for up to 1 year after you graduate. So up till the end of next year, you can use any of our services. And even after that, you can't use our one-to-one services after that, but you can still use our resources. So they're basically available to you ongoing. So please get as much as you can out of today's workshop, but also think about using the services. If you need to see after today, if you find you need, it'd be good to talk to someone about where you're going, what you're doing. Very happy to help you. Okay? Anything else, resource, service-wise? Covered? Okay. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to pass you over to Denise, who's going to talk about sourcing work.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Rob. Good morning, everyone. Congratulations to those of you who are just graduating this year, and thank you for coming along this morning. As Rob said, I'm going to be taking you through the first part of this workshop on how to source a job, particularly all the ways of sourcing work that don't involve online jobs boards, which aren't always the best strategy for graduates, as I'm sure some of you are discovering. So I'm going to be talking about preparing for job search, what you need to do, also the power of networking, how to use your networks to find a job. And we're going to be doing a practical session to get your elevator pitch together so that you're prepared for networking events. And then my colleague Peter is going to be talking about how to use LinkedIn to your advantage, how to conduct informational interviews, and how to carry out company research. So that's what we're going through in the first part of our workshop. Can everyone hear me okay at the back? Good, thanks. So preparing for job search. One of the really important things about successful job search is having the right mindset before you begin. So this is really important in terms of seeing all the opportunities that are available to you, and also in terms of dealing with the inevitable challenges as well. So there is a book by psychologist Carol Dweck called Mindset, and in that she talks about the importance of having a growth mindset as opposed to a fixed mindset. Do we have any psychology students in here? You might have heard of this one, yeah. So basically, if you have a fixed mindset, it means that your abilities and skills are fixed, they can't be improved. Whereas if you have a growth mindset, it means that you can improve and grow and develop. So when you make mistakes or have failures, you don't see it as such a setback, you see it as a learning experience. And this is really important when you're going for interviews. If you get rejected for a role and you have a fixed mindset, you might think that you are not smart and talented enough to get the job, and that's why they didn't choose you. Whereas if you have a growth mindset, you'll realize what you need to do to improve, you'll reflect on it, and hopefully you'll go and ask for feedback from your interviewers as well so that you can improve on it for next time. So this is really important, and you can cultivate a growth mindset. even if you have a fixed one already. And you'll probably have noticed this if people say, you know, I'm just no good with numbers, I have no head for maths. And that's a fixed mindset in action. So if you don't believe that you can improve, you're not going to apply yourself. You're not going to try. And I've put think like an entrepreneur there because I do think it's important when you're job seeking to take complete responsibility for the outcomes that you create for yourself. So you're not blaming external factors. Now, you're not blaming yourself either, but you do take responsibility for what happens. So if you're not getting interviews, if you're applying for jobs online and you're not getting interviews, you're not going to get upset or despondent over it. You're going to be able to step back and say, okay, obviously this isn't working. What do I need to do instead? How can I change my approach? And that's thinking more like an entrepreneur because you're taking complete responsibility for everything. Self-awareness, this is going to be important throughout your career, but really important when you're job seeking and networking, which we're going to be talking about later on. And networking is actually going to give you lots of insight into this, what your strengths are and where your skills gaps are. Because when you're networking and having informational interviews with employers, they're going to give you feedback on what you have, on the strengths you have and your accomplishments, and you're going to be able to ask them about what they see as important in terms of skills and attributes in applicants. What kind of people do they want to hire? And that's going to give you an idea of where your gaps are. And you can think about how you can bridge those gaps, whether it's doing more study, it could be informal study, it could be doing research to improve your chances. And finally, believing in yourself, having confidence in the value that you offer employers. And I know that might be hard at the very beginning of your career, because if you're looking for a job at the moment, you might be a bit freaked out if everyone's looking for experience and you don't have the experience that they're looking for. But it's important to understand that your confidence is only going to grow over time. It's like a muscle that you can build. So the more you put yourself out there and take risks by doing some networking, maybe even volunteering, freelance or contract work, this is all going to help build your confidence as you go along. And it's also, I think, a key thing to bear in mind as well, that what you lack in experience, you're going to make up for in enthusiasm and motivation. And that's what employers want to see. They really want people who are hungry for the job, who are really, really keen to do the best they can in that role. So that's a big selling point that you have that you may not realize. Okay. So how did graduates find their jobs? So I kind of want to draw your attention to the very first percentage figure here, because if you've been applying for jobs online, you'll probably see that the effort you're putting in is disproportionate to the results. So only around a quarter of students actually got their job through answering an advertisement on the internet. And you can see there's a lot of other ways to find a job, which we're going to talk about. Now, it's still a significant number, so I'm not saying you shouldn't do it, but you can use these other strategies in tandem with that. So ideally, you will be networking with people inside the organization that you're going to be applying for jobs within. That's the ideal scenario. So the other disadvantage of using this method is obviously the competition that you're up against. So on average, according to the research, there's about 250 applicants for each job. That's not the best scenario for graduates. You want to be in a situation where you're maybe the only candidate being considered, or at least you're one of very few. And that can absolutely happen if you use a different strategy. So how do you find a job? So these are just some of the main ways that graduates can find jobs. And we're going to be talking about networking in a minute. You've obviously got Swin Employ, employer information sessions. You can book them on there. And we've also got a jobs board for graduates on there. Websites advertise jobs, so Seek, Indeed, Ethical Jobs, lots of other specialty job sites as well. Recruitment agencies, and as Rob was saying, we're going to hear from someone from Dixon, a large recruiter later on, who's going to tell you what they want to see from graduate candidates. And your online profile on LinkedIn. This is becoming increasingly important, and Peter's going to talk a bit more about this later. You can also approach employers directly with your CV and cover letter. And again, you can use this as a strategy with networking. So hopefully you might know somebody in that organization before you do the approach. But you can cold call and cold canvas as well. And obviously you've got your graduate programs, which you apply for at the beginning of the final year. Okay. So we're going to focus a bit on networking. A lot of students that I see are really resistant to networking because they think it involves talking to strangers and asking people they don't know for jobs. But that's not what networking is at all. And you probably don't realize that you already have a great network. Even here at Swinburne alone, you've got lecturers, you've got academics, tutors who have connections with industry. I'm always amazed by how few students actually make the most of that opportunity. And you've also got your classmates. So your classmates are actually a really important part of your network because they're all going to be working in the same industry as you. So as you progress in your career, keeping in touch with them and where they're at is a really, really good thing to do for support as well as for opportunities. But oftentimes we don't realize what's under our nose when it comes to our network. So if your family's anything like as big as mine, you've got a ton of aunts and uncles and cousins and whoever else that you have no idea what they do for a living. So making it your business to find out, do they work at any of the companies that you're interested in working at? And it doesn't matter if they're not in the same specialty or field as you. If they work within the organization, they can potentially help you. So it's worth talking to everybody you know first and starting there. You can also ask your network to suggest other people for you to talk to. So then, when you've exhausted all avenues of the people you do know, how can you increase your network? So these are just some of the ways that you can do that. And I love talking to people who have the job that you want. I think that's a really great idea to get in touch with those people. And when Peter takes you through LinkedIn later, he's going to show you Swinburne's Alumni tool, which is going to help you get in touch with past graduates of your course and hopefully reach out to them, have a chat with them, see what they're doing, get some insights on their role, what they like, what they dislike about it. So I think those are really good people to speak to expand your network. They're also going to be able to tell you about what skills are important, what they like and don't like about the job. Next is hiring managers, and I'm going to talk a bit more about this later when I give you some examples from my own personal experience of how I've reached out to hiring managers with some success and how to go about that. Swin Employ, I've also mentioned that already. We've got employer information sessions on there that you can book into and actually go and meet with employers in your field. Professional associations are a great one. Does everyone know the professional association for their industry? Has anyone joined yet? Yeah, that's good, because often you can get reduced price student memberships, and it's really worth joining at that point so you can try it out, go to some networking events and see what they have to offer. So for those of you who don't know, so it's like in Engineers Australia or the Australian Psychological Society, so every industry has its own professional association. And they usually run networking events, seminars, professional development, and often they have mentoring programs, which is at low cost as well, which is a really, really good idea if you're graduating to get involved. After that, you've got online opportunities for networking as well through Meetup, Facebook, and LinkedIn groups. Obviously, if you do volunteering, that's a great way to network and build your network, and freelancing and contract work. So a few points about networking. Obviously, you do have to be respectful and always thank people for their time when they help you out, and understand that it is a two-way relationship. So you don't want to be the person who's always asking for help with getting a job. No one really appreciates that. On the flip side of that, though, do understand that people want to help you. When you're a student and when you're a graduate, lots of people are keen to help you because they remember what it was like to be in your shoes. And some of the people that you're talking to will probably have kids in your position as well. So people are empathetic with graduates, looking for their first job. So don't be afraid to reach out and ask people for advice, okay? Because you'll be giving back yourself later on. So it's a two-way street. So this is actually an old fundraising adage, but I think it applies to job seekers as well. So asking for a job maybe you'll get advice, but unlikely to get a job. But if you ask for advice, you'll get more opportunities. And the reason for this is, if you think about it, asking for a job or opportunities, if that person doesn't know of any jobs going, they may feel bad that they don't have anything. And also, there's nowhere else for the conversation to go. So they might say, okay, send me your resume if I hear of anything. But that's kind of a conversation stopper, whereas you want to open it out. So if you ask for their advice, you can actually get to build a connection, see whether that company is one that you're interested in working at, find out more information that's going to help your job search later on. So never ask for a job. I know it can feel weird at times, and yes, the other person does know that you're looking for a job, but you don't directly ask for one. So I want to tell you a few examples just from my own experience of networking, because I feel like sometimes we teach these things and people can't really put them in context. But in my experience, and I've had a lot of jobs over the course of my career, and very few of them have been sourced through advertised job market. Mainly, I've gotten them through networking or doing placements or volunteering. So, for example, when I was first looking for a job in the university sector, I attended an interview at an organization that I really, really wanted to work at. But I hadn't had an interview for a long time, and I hadn't really prepared enough. So it didn't go very well. I was really quite nervous on the day. And I was really disappointed afterwards, and I thought maybe I had blown my chances with that organization for good. But instead of kind of blowing it off, I got in touch with the hiring manager, asked for feedback, connected on LinkedIn, and stayed in touch with that person. And around a year later, when I was looking for a job again, I got in touch with him to ask if he could have a coffee or a phone call. And he said to me, oh, you won't believe this, but my manager has just asked me to hire another consultant. And I was working there within a week. So when students say to me that they haven't followed up after interviews, I always encourage them to do so, because you can absolutely turn a failure into an opportunity. If you're willing to learn from the experience and kind of swallow your pride and go back and ask them for feedback, it's so worthwhile. And you have to remember as well that if you didn't get the job, you still went for the interview. So that means you were shortlisted, and that means you might have only just missed out on it. So next time a job comes up, they might be more than happy to hire you. Okay. Other lessons I've learned: you don't have to be a perfect networker. And what I mean by that is, if you're not an extroverted person who likes going to lots of events and talking to strangers, you can still learn to be a great networker. Just go with your strengths. So if you're an introvert, it might be doing more one-on-one coffees. Maybe big events aren't your thing. Or it could be that, you might just meet a few people at an event that you attend, but your connection with them might go deeper. So there's no one perfect way of being a good networker. You just have to do your own thing, what suits you. I do think it's really important to set a clear goal when you're networking, even if you're not 100% sure what you want to do, because otherwise it's really hard for people to actually help you if you don't know exactly what you want. Does that make sense? So even if you're not sure, set a goal anyway, or make it your goal to get that clarity. Because talking to lots of people, networking, it's going to help you see, well, where are my skills a good fit? What am I interested in? And I also can't stress enough the importance of informational interviews, which Peter's going to talk about a bit later on. But that's actually how I ended up working at Swinburne. I saw a job that I was interested in posted online, but the closing date had passed. So I thought, oh, I've probably missed out on that. And then I noticed that the hiring manager that was listed on there was someone I'd had an informational interview with the previous year and had a really good conversation with. So I thought, well, I'll just give her a ring anyway. What's the harm? I'll just ring her and ask her about the job. And I rang and she said, oh yeah, that job has gone already. But she said, I do have this other role that you might be interested in. And that's how I ended up working here. So again, that job was never advertised. So I just want to encourage you to reach out to people and start having those conversations. Don't be intimidated about doing it. It's really, really worthwhile. And the last thing is to trust that opportunities are out there. Because I think that sometimes students that I speak to, if they're relying on the online jobs boards, it can seem like opportunities are really limited, but you're not seeing everything. So you have to trust in what you can't see, that there are loads of hidden jobs out there, and act accordingly. So you don't get too down about not seeing that many jobs advertised for graduates, for example. That doesn't mean they're not out there. Okay. So finally, I just want to give you a few tips for emailing hiring managers. We'll talk a bit more about this later as well, but we're going to do an elevator pitch exercise next, which will help you with networking events, but it will also help you with writing emails to people and introducing yourself. So you want to keep it fairly succinct, in a nutshell, about yourself and what you're trying to accomplish as well. So what industry are you targeting? And why do you want to do this type of work? Remember, motivation is really important, and your enthusiasm to do this type of work. I think it's also important to be really specific about what you want from them, because everyone is really, really busy. So, you know, being specific about the time that you need as well, 15 or 20 minutes, making it easy for them to say yes. So offering to come and meet them close to their work, or having a phone call. So these will all increase your chances that someone will want to speak to you. And it's also a respectful thing to do, I think, as well. Okay, so next we're going to do an elevator pitch exercise, and this is going to help you with doing outreach, and also, as I said, with attending networking events. So has anyone done an elevator pitch before? Or practice one, yeah? Okay, that's good. So you're going to get another chance to do it. So basically what you want to do is include your qualifications and the role and industry that you're targeting, as well as, you know, the parts of the role that you enjoy, what you want to do. Remember, like, don't put too much pressure on yourself over this, because remember, you don't have to give them everything in one go. You don't want to be talking for 10 minutes and people's eyes will be glazing over. You're aiming for less than 40 seconds, and it's just a conversation opener. So you don't have to, you know, what you want to do is pique their interest, get them to ask you questions about, more questions about what you want to do. So if you can spend maybe about the next minute, we'll time it, and just write a really brief introduction for yourself, and then we're just going to practice with your neighbour, get you together in pairs or threes, okay? Have a go at it and see how you go. Has anyone got questions? Yeah. That might help.
Okay. Hello, how's everybody feeling? Yeah? Good? No, yes. This guy's going, oh, no. Pretty ordinary, actually. Okay, who's got a LinkedIn profile? Oh, that's good, that's good. So, this is not going to be an intense presentation on LinkedIn, because there's so many things to talk about: how to build a profile, and what to include and what not to include, and how to go into it, and how to include stuff in LinkedIn that you can't demonstrate in CVs and cover letters and other business as well. But what we really want to get through to you today is some of the essential tools that you can and should be using in LinkedIn at this part of your career, if you're about to graduate or if you're looking to build networks. It's a really, really powerful tool in that respect. So hopefully that'll be useful for you. Some of the critical aspects about LinkedIn. This is why you really need a LinkedIn profile. Obviously, the extensive use of Australians using it in the business and community sector. Having worked, that second point, having worked for a recruitment agency myself a couple of times, we did use LinkedIn quite often to fill positions, and you'll actually find a lot of organisations these days that only use LinkedIn to recruit staff. So they're not using seek.com.au, or they're not using newspaper media, or they're not using other resources. Why do you think an organisation would use LinkedIn rather than another method? There's a few different reasons, but there's 2 or 3 main reasons. Could anybody suggest any reason? Yeah? Yeah, Yeah, that's right. So it's transparent and it's very visible, very quickly. Yeah, that's right. Anybody else got a suggestion of why? Yeah. Yeah, it's easy. It's very easy and quick to put an advertisement on LinkedIn. Yeah. Yeah, that's a huge one. So if you've ever worked in recruitment before, you will know that it's quite expensive to use an organisation like seek.com.au for a large ad. It can go into the thousands. And then when you're talking about using recruitment companies, they often take 10% of the yearly salary of the position for the recruitment process. So it's quite expensive, whereas LinkedIn, particularly for small to medium-sized organisations, it's a very cost-effective method. These are good reasons for people to use LinkedIn to recruit, and we'll talk a bit about how you can get access to those jobs quickly as well, as soon as they're advertised. I can guarantee this is correct as well. So a bit like Facebook, when you apply for a job, you can bet that the person, the recruiter or the employer looking at your resume will look at your LinkedIn profile or look at your Facebook profile. So it's really critical that you have a LinkedIn profile that is up to date and is honest and adds strength to your application as well. And the last point is a really important point as well. So when you apply for a job, or if somebody is researching your suitability or authenticity, if they put your name into Google, the first thing that's going to come up is LinkedIn. I'll actually test this. I haven't done this for a while, and I'll look like an idiot if it doesn't work, but who cares? Let's try it anyway. So let's go to Google. There's Google. Cross your fingers, Rob. Hope this works. I'll put my name in. Peter Bellino. There it goes. Yeah, first one is LinkedIn. So the search algorithm is very similar. They're very friendly, Google and LinkedIn. So these are all good reasons why you want to have that LinkedIn profile up and ready. Okay, so before I go into the next slide, here's another question for you. What can you add? What can you include in LinkedIn profile that you can't do on a normal resume or cover letter? So how can you sell yourself? What ways can you do it in LinkedIn that you can't do on a CV? Yep.
Add a video?
Yeah, add a video, and I'll show you my profile in a minute where I've got a video. So what can you demonstrate in a video that you can't demonstrate on a CV? What's one skill?
Elevator pitch. You can have a 40-second or 1 minute elevator pitch
Yep.
about yourself.
Most definitely you can include that. And what skill would you be demonstrating, or what skills, there's lots of skills, would you be demonstrating in that elevator pitch on your video that you can't demonstrate on a CV? Anybody? What's that? Yeah, verbal communication is a huge thing. You know, if you look at employer surveys in Australia and across the world, you'll almost see just about every time that number one or number two is communication, verbal communication. So you can't demonstrate that on a CV or a cover letter, but that's something you can do on LinkedIn. So I think I've got my profile just to just show you quickly. I won't play the video, but if I go into my profile, see more, and there I've got a couple of videos there and a couple of photos there as well. So once again, a photo is a thing that you could include on the LinkedIn profile, and obviously most employers wouldn't want a photo on your CV or your cover letter. What kind of photo would you include, and what kind of photo wouldn't you include to strengthen your profile for your industry or a job that you're going for on LinkedIn? Do you think? What would? Yep.
I included a photo of me wearing a suit.
Yep, that's a good one. So if you're applying for a professional job where most of the people in that industry are wearing suits, then you can say, hey, I'm one of you guys. You know, look at me, kind of thing. I'm ready for business. So yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. Any other things that you would or wouldn't include in the photo? Yeah.
Well, if you were a graphic designer, you could include an image of your logo.
Yep, fantastic, exactly. And that's a really good example. And using that across industries, if you were looking for a job in a tactile type of occupation where you're creating something, you might have a photo or a video of you involved in the design or the manufacture of that particular item. So that's a really strong selling point. As like Facebook, you wouldn't want to obviously put any photos that would go against you or put you in a light that is not kind of conducive to the type of area you want to go into. The other thing you might want to put on is, if you want to show off like I often do, is you put a photo of like awards you've received. If it's with notable people, that's always going to look nice. With the video, presenting something on a topic that is important to the employer that you aspire to work for as well. So that's a little tip as well that I would recommend as well. Now, as I said, I'm not going to go into too much detail about all the ins and outs of LinkedIn, but what I would say is LinkedIn is a little bit different to, as you would expect, to a resume and cover letter, in the sense that a cover letter and a resume is targeted at a particular job. It always should be targeted at a particular job, at a particular organisation. And as a recruiter, you can really smell a generic resume from a targeted resume. So resume is very targeted at a job. LinkedIn, you can't really do that, because if you target at a particular job, then you might be excluding other jobs that you're also interested in as well. So you need to be, when you're developing your LinkedIn profile, mindful that you might want to work in a variety of different industries or in a variety of different roles, and there'll be different skills that are relevant to those organisations or to those industries. So just be mindful when you're designing your LinkedIn profile and describing your skills that you cover all the things that the varietal of those organisations or industries seek. Does that kind of make sense? So it's, in a sense, it's going to be more general, I suppose, the LinkedIn profile rather than the resume. Now, some people use LinkedIn passively, some use it actively, and some use it both. And my recommendation to you is to use both. So an example of using it passively is you put your profile there and you just wait. You wait for people to connect with you, and that sometimes happens. Recruiters, they use their own search algorithms, and they'll go, okay, go and look for people who have got these qualifications in their profile, who've got this much experience, who say these keywords in their profile. And you might get tapped on the shoulder and somebody will send you a message on LinkedIn. So that does happen. But my recommendation to you is to be more of an active user of LinkedIn, and that is to actually build your networks through LinkedIn, and build networks with the people that you want to know. So people who are working in jobs that you aspire to work in, or working in industries, or working at particular organisations. And I think the best tool to do that is the LinkedIn Alumni tool. Has anybody used the LinkedIn Alumni tool? There's only 2 or 3 people. Okay. It's an absolutely fantastic tool, LinkedIn Alumni, because what you can do is you can say, tell me all the people who graduated at Swinburne who did the same course that I did, who are working in this particular field, and it will give you all their profiles. So I'll just use an example. This is, when you go into LinkedIn, this is the home page. Okay, so everybody would have kind of seen that before. You'll see your profile on this side, your feed, and recommendations of who to hook up with there. In the search facility, if you put Swinburne University, click that, you'll go to the Swinburne homepage. That's the Swinburne homepage. And if you select alumni, it will bring up all the alumni who are on LinkedIn. So at the moment it's just under 110,000. Okay, so obviously you need to refine it. And you can refine it by where they live, where they work, what they do, what they studied, what they're skilled at, and if you're connected or not. So if you're doing, say, accounting, for example, and you're looking for a job as, say, I want to put accountant in here, just to pick one, you'll see that number drop down to 4,451. That's still way too many. So you might think, well, okay, some might be working in the accounting area but didn't actually study accounting. So you'll see there's quite a variety of different business courses. And you might think, well, I did banking and finance or accounting and finance. Give me those ones. So that's going to drop it down again. So we're down to 1,000. And you might think, well, my employer of choice is PwC or Toll or whoever it was. So if I chose PwC, for example, it will give me, we're down to 4, the 4 people who are working at PwC who did accounting at Swinburne. So this is pretty powerful because what it means is you can reach out to these people, and this is what I'd recommend, is you reach out to these people and conduct what we call an informational interview or informational chat. And in the experience, since I've been working in the tertiary sector and with my private clients that I work with, informational interviewing is the most powerful way to build networks and to source jobs through the back door. So we talked about that only 25% of jobs are actually advertised online. Lots and lots of jobs, internships, work experience are sourced through these informational interviews. And what informational interviews are is where you make a connection with someone like this and say, can I have half an hour of your time, not to ask for a job, but to talk about your job. How did you get your job? What kind of hints could you give me as somebody who wants to get into this industry or aspires to work for PwC? Is it a growing industry or declining? Do you like your job? What do you do in your job? So it builds a lot of information for you, but also communicates to this person that you're actually in the job market without actually asking for a job. One of the difficulties you have with LinkedIn in this process of connection is that you can't connect with this person, you can't email this person through LinkedIn unless you're a connection with them. So there's 2 things you can do. One is you can ask to be a connection with them, and you can put a personalised message. Has anybody ever done that? A personalised message? Yeah, a few people through LinkedIn to say, I want to connect with you because whatever. The other way is you can email that person directly. Now, their email usually won't be on their LinkedIn profile, but how would you find their email address? Would anybody make a suggestion? Say for this person, for example. Yep.
Find their company website, see if the email's listed on the website in the contact us section.
Yep, that's one way. I reckon there's a quicker way. Yeah.
Upgrade.
You can upgrade. Yeah, that's the second way, and I think it's about $60 a month or so to do that. Oh, is it 32? Is it? Oh, cool. There we go. And there's one other way that's free and quicker.
Google the name.
Google the name. Yeah, I could find that guy's email address in less than 60 seconds by Googling his name and going through the results. Is that legal? Yes. Is it ethical? I don't really care, actually, if it's ethical or not. But you need to be polite in the email that you send. So what you really need to do in the email, in my opinion, we'll talk about this a little bit later as well, in a bit more depth, is explain who you are, your connection to that person. You both studied accounting at Swinburne, and request politely an opportunity to either speak to that person face-to-face or by phone or via email to ask career-related questions. The people that I've worked with, both at Swinburne and my private clients, find that if they do that in that formula, that connection, that email connection, 6 out of 10 of the people they connect with agree to a face-to-face or phone or email conversation. So it's high. It's quite high percentage rate that you're going to get that opportunity to ask those questions to that person and make that connection. So, in my opinion, that's an absolute gold way to build your network and to find out more about the job that person's doing and what's happening in the industry. So, do you think that could be useful, that alumni tool for you? And you're going to find some industries that there's less people who are on LinkedIn than others. So obviously in the business field, most people have a LinkedIn profile and a lot of them are active on LinkedIn. But then when you get into other areas, maybe into like perhaps fine arts, for example, you find that you'll get less people who are using LinkedIn. So I would still use it, but there might be other ways you'll need to explore building network, as Denise was talking about, professional associations, and finding out through other mechanisms as well. So that would be my suggestion for those kind of industries. Okay, let's go back to this. One thing you can do, which is a little bit like Facebook, but you can do on LinkedIn as well and other online tools, is subscribe to companies, subscribe to groups, and subscribe to industries. And what that means is if you aspire to work at a particular organisation, that if you put that organisation in your feed, that if they publish a job, you'll be one of the first people to find out about it. So if they're only using LinkedIn to advertise that job, that's a gold situation for you because you'll have quite quick access to it. Obviously everybody else will have access to it as well, but if somebody's not subscribing to that organisation, they might miss out totally on that opportunity. Is that a question or a scratch of the head? Scratch of the head, sorry. So that's a great way to look for jobs. But the other great thing about researching and subscribing to companies is that you actually find out what are the hot topics in the industry right now on a up-to-date, day-to-day basis. So if you get an interview or if you're making an application for a job, you can feed that information into the application that you're making. If you get an interview and they ask you why are you interested in this organisation, you can talk about some of the things they're doing and how excited you are about a project they're doing. So they'll be reporting on those kind of things using this media. So it's really, really critical that not just get access to jobs, but get access to actually what's happening in the industry as well. You'll be able to feed that information and strengthen your application. Really, really critical. We've talked about the LinkedIn Alumni tool, and I'm just trying to think if there's anything else I would add to that at this stage. You can really refine quite significantly the filtering process for. So when you're doing your search, you might decide to start the search based on the organisation rather than the type of work that they're doing, or you might not filter by what they study, but filter by the actual specific role that they're doing in the organisation as well. So have a play around with it, but that would be my suggestion is, my suggestion would be to use this approach in your using the alumni. So even before step one, I would set up a hit list. Who are 12, 15, 20 people that you would love to be able to sit down with and ask them questions about the industry, their job, career advice of how to get into that type of role or that type of organisation. Then send them a personalised message either via the alumni tool through the alumni connection or via their email, and you'll need to research their email address. And request an informational interview, and that interview could be via face-to-face, by phone, Skype, or by email. And look, the aim is really to find out these kind of things. And once again, I emphasise, don't blatantly ask for a job. I've had lots of people who have conducted interviews with me when I worked in recruitment and in the tertiary sector, and within the first 30 seconds they ask for a job, and it's really off-putting. And if I don't have a job, as Denise was saying, I feel pretty useless as well. So, and I think it's kind of disrespectful. It's not really good professional etiquette to do that as well, I don't think. So these are the kind of things you want to do. People hire people that they trust, and if you get the opportunity to have an informational interview and you get a chance to see this person 2 or 3 times and you leave a good impression with them, there's a very good chance that what happened to Denise, that person that called them or said, oh, by the way, we actually do have a role, because they know you, they've met you, they've spoken to you, they feel comfortable with you, you'll be 2 or 3 steps ahead of the person who's just sending a resume. Some of that trust has been built already. And then the follow-up part, my suggestion with the follow-up is leave something at the end of the interview that will continue the relationship. So perhaps it might be an opportunity to say during the interview, is it okay if I follow up with you again in 4 weeks' time or six weeks' time, so that you can keep the relationship going. Or ask the person during the interview, is there any research I should be doing that will help me in my job search? And they can provide that, and maybe you can feed that back to them, the work that you've actually done. You're probably asking, what are some of the questions I would ask in this informational interview? And there's a fantastic website called Quint Careers, and I've scoured the internet. I've spent hours and hours and hours going through the internet of the best resources of how to build networks, and I think this is the best one that exists at the moment that is actually free, and it's called Quint Careers. And it's absolutely brilliant because it talks about what informational interviewing is, but then it takes you step by step of how you actually go through the full process. And it goes through from why you would want to do an informational interview, the guidelines for doing it, how to identify the right people, obviously not asking for a job, scheduling the information interview, what to write in the letter, or the email requesting the informational interview, preparation before the interview, what to wear, questions to ask. I love this part because the questions to ask that they have in this section will really keep the conversation moving, will build trust in the person, and will put you, they're all professionally allowable questions as well. So this is a great website for having in your arsenal 10 or 12 questions ready for the interview that will keep that person talking, and will build a relationship as well. So that's a fantastic website for that. So as Denise was saying, the stats that she showed on how people get jobs, they are real. We're not making those up. That most jobs are never advertised. Most jobs are never advertised. And I don't think I've applied for a job for maybe 12 years. It's always been someone emailing me saying, "Did you know there's a job going there? Are you interested?" And I've sourced it and before it's even been advertised. Or it has been advertised, but I've already been pigeoned to get that actual role. So that will happen to you as well as you get further and further in your career and you build relationships with people. But this is a really, really good place to start, building those relationships. And this is the backdoor entry into those jobs that are never advertised. And I would suggest that 60 to 70% of jobs are never advertised and they're sourced through these kind of mechanisms. So you really need to be doing this. As I was saying, a part of your building of networks can be through joining groups that have similar interests to you and working in areas that you aspire to. Alumni, Swim Alumni is very strong, and I'd suggest that if you're going to graduate this year, that you join as quickly as possible. They have a lot of events where they bring people together who are working in similar organisations, similar industries, and once again, that's another way how jobs are are shared, not through advertising but through that mechanism. So if you're not a member of the alumni group, please join that when you graduate. Now, I thought we were going to get a person from Alumni to talk, but I don't. Is that person here? I don't think so. Okay, that's all right. As I said, the type of services that Alumni offer, they've got their events. They've also got a mentoring program, which is fantastic. So it'd be absolutely fantastic if you could be a mentee with somebody who's already working in an organisation or industry that you aspire to. And I believe you would have access to them during your undergraduate studies. So my suggestion to you is email or go to the alumni website, which I've got there, and find out about their mentoring program for the industry that you're working in. When I was working at another university, we had an alumni, we had a mentoring program with IBM and National Australia Bank and supply chain companies, and lots of those mentees were offered work experience, internships, and later on roles through their mentor. So it's a really, really strong source of building trust and sourcing employment. How are we going for time there?
About 5 minutes.
About 5 minutes? Okay. And then we'll have a break.
Sorry, 10 minutes.
10 minutes, okay. Okay, so as I mentioned as well, just quickly back on LinkedIn, that you'll find that positions are advertised through LinkedIn. Does everybody know how to access those positions? Does anybody access a LinkedIn? Yep, got a few yeses and a few nos. So anybody who knows how to do it, I'll just go back to my, must be here. If you go back to your home page, so where do you think I would go to look at jobs that would be relevant to me? Yep, yep, exactly right. So this is going to be based on your profile and what educational qualifications you've got and what experience you've got and the keywords as well. So some you'll think look really, really bizarre, but for me, they're about spot on because they're all HR, recruitment, mainly HR and recruitment. And as I'm going through them, I'm seeing that there's some large organisations, but then there's some quite small organisations that I've never heard of. I don't think I've ever heard of Munro Footwear Group. Although it's 11 people from RMIT that work there. Yeah. So this is particularly useful for where there's small to medium-sized organisations who are only using this media as their recruitment method. And there's some that actually do that. So that's particularly useful. And the vast majority of Swinburne graduates work at small to medium-sized organisations, the vast majority. So the multinationals and the top 100 companies that you see in some of the publications that are going around, a very small percentage of graduates actually go to those roles. So your focus really needs to be spread. You can obviously look at those big organisations that have graduate programs, but just be mindful that most of them are going to be these type of small to medium-sized organisations. Now, there's one more thing I need to say about alumni, and as I said about LinkedIn, and I know I didn't go into too much detail, but one critical thing that you need to make sure about your LinkedIn profile that most people don't know about are the privacy settings. Now, the default on LinkedIn is that if somebody is not a connection of yours, they can only see a very limited amount of your profile, and that's no good for you because you want organisations to be able to see your full profile, all your experience, all your qualifications, and all the secret information that's not shown to non-connections. So if you're on LinkedIn at the moment, or if you're not and you're thinking about doing it, make sure that you do go into your account settings, and you need to actually change in privacy some of the settings so that viewers of your profile can see all your information, that they don't have to be a connection to see your information. And there's different levels. So, for example, you might want some people to see your email address and your mobile telephone number. But you might want only your connections to see that information, and that's fine. But you want to make sure that any potential recruiter or any employers can see everything that you want them to see. So I won't go into depth about that, but that was the number one biggest gap in knowledge that I found presenting LinkedIn profiles to students at Swinburne. So make sure you go into that when you get home or get a chance. Make sure that you're showing people the stuff that you want them to see. Okay? And in my last 2 minutes, I think that I've got, about 2 minutes, yep, before we have our break. I think that's after the break, isn't it? Informational interviews. Let's have a look. I can cover that after the break? Before the break? Okay. So what I would suggest, this is what I spoke about before, informational interviews. I think this is just like a reiteration of what I was speaking about before. Like the key thing here is you're building your not just your network, but your knowledge of the organisations and the industry that you aspire to work for. And I think that we had an activity here for you as well, that what you might want to do, you don't need to do it now, but I definitely would do it, is start making an audit of who are the people that you already know that might be useful for your career. So your lecturer, your tutors, their connections, family or friends, that have connections in the industry, and then who are the people that I need to be speaking with, and then you've got a starting point. Otherwise it's just a jungle. You don't know where you're starting or where you're finishing. So my suggestion to you would be start with that process now. Even if you're in first year, this is a good place to start, building this spreadsheet of the people you know already and the people that you aspire to make connections with. And Marianne, are you presenting now, or you're just coming in?
After the break.
After the break, okay. So we'll take just a short break, a 5-minute break, just a chance to get some water or go to the toilet, and then we'll come back with Marianne. So thank you for your attention. We'll see you shortly. Okay.
All right, so I know that you're probably all quite keen for lunch and that you've already sat through a session. So everyone up the back, can you hear me okay? Yep, fantastic. All right, so my name's Marianne Baskis-Abrahams and I'm the Global Career Advisor here at Swinburne University. And I've been at the university as a career advisor now for 9.5 years, and I'm a Swinburne graduate myself, so it wasn't too long ago that I was sitting in your shoes. So today's session that I'm about to do is really an extension of what you have already heard and hopefully learnt this morning. So the topics that I'm going to cover are job applications, how to keep track of them, because that's actually a really important thing that you do. In the past, I've worked as a recruiter, and my pet hate was when I rang a candidate for a job interview and they would say, "What job is this for again?" You should know. You should know which job it is that you applied for when you wrote the letter to me. The other thing I'm going to talk to you about is key selection criteria. And when I speak to students, this is something that people find quite confusing in terms of how to actually address it in their application. We're going to talk a little bit about interviews. We're going to practice some interview questions, so I'm sure you're all really looking forward to that. We're going to talk about referees as well, because no matter how good your application and how good your interview, if your referees are not positive, you are not going to be the successful candidate. So you really do need to think about who you use as your references. And then I'll talk a little bit about, at the end, about some global career opportunities. So who's been applying for lots and lots of jobs? So by lots and lots, what are we talking about? Throw out some numbers.
25, 30.
25, 30? Yep. In a period of how long would you say?
2 months.
2 months, yep. Anyone else want to throw some numbers?
30 in 1 month.
30 in 1 month, yep. 1 a day. Yep. Anyone else? So how do you keep track of those? Do any of you have a system in place at the moment?
I've got a file with all my cover letters that I ever used to apply for jobs. And I just
Yep.
oh, okay, that's my first. I'm just going to call back and contact that person if I'm successful. Okay.
Yep. Excellent. So it's a really good idea to keep track of which job you've applied to, when you sent the application. It'll also help you in that perhaps 2-week post-application period if you wanted to follow up with them, which I would strongly encourage all of you to do if you've not heard anything. It will also mean that you're quite clear about what job it is they're calling you for if they do call to do a telephone screen or to organise a face-to-face interview of some sorts, whether that be a group assessment or a one-on-one interview or a panel interview. So you're being judged and interviewed from the second that you answer the phone for that phone screening. So you also need to treat that as an interview and act professionally throughout it. So my tip to you would be, if you're out and about and you're somewhere really noisy and you get that phone call and it's not a good time for you to talk, you can't really hear them, ask them if it would be okay if you called them back in perhaps half an hour and that you're out about at the moment. Most recruiters, most HR managers are going to be completely understanding of that, and they would prefer to have a conversation with you when you're not sort of saying, sorry, what was that? And lots of background noise. So it's actually okay to do that, and that can be a really good thing to do as well. That will also give you time to review your application, what you said in the cover letter, what the criteria of the job was for, before you go through that telephone screening process, because they'll be asking you all sorts of questions to make sure that the job is suitable for you. So usually it's things like that you're aware of the location of the role, whether it's full-time or part-time, what the hours might be, and a general scope. Not too much information at that stage, but just enough so that they can find out that they're not going to be wasting their time by interviewing you for a position that's just not suitable for whatever reason. So there is a job application spreadsheet that's available to you. We also run, so that's this one here. Okay, so it's available to you in the handouts that you should have been provided with for today's session. Can I get a nod? Everyone knows what I'm talking about? Excellent, okay. We also run regular job application workshops as well. I know you've heard a lot about it today already, but if you needed a refresher, that's something you can do. And we also have the fast track service. Have you heard about that one already? Yep.
About the spreadsheet that you've got shown in the presentation, can we download that anywhere?
Yeah, it's on Blackboard. Swin Employ. Yeah. So if you just did a search under resources for job applications, you would find it. Okay? Yep. Were the handouts emailed out to you as well? Yep, so it would be on that email also. Okay? So anyone got any comments about any of that? Does that sound like a good idea? Yep.
I had a question about so when we apply for a job,
Yep.
and we've been through the interview process, so we don't hear back. And like when I checked their website, it says that I'm still under consideration, and it's been like a month and a half. Should I still wait or accept that we are?
You have to look after you, would be my advice. Employers expect that you're applying for more than one job, so they're not going to expect that you're going to be sitting around and waiting for their call. If there's a delay in their processes in terms of making a decision for whatever reason, and sometimes there's reasons outside of their control as to why that delay is happening, they're going to miss out on a great candidate potentially, and they're aware of that. So if you have multiple jobs that you're applying for and you get an offer from one company and you haven't heard back from the other, you could accept it, or you could ask for 24 hours to consider that role and call your preferred company and find out where they're at, let them know you've got another offer, but your preference is to work with them and where are they at. So it's about being honest and transparent and having those conversations. Does that answer your question? Yeah? There's a question over here. We're going to talk a bit more about job applications in a minute.
Just want to ask if you would advise to apply for lots of jobs or apply for
quality over quantity would be my advice. So absolutely apply for lots of jobs, but make sure your applications are of a quality standard. So if you can feasibly only send out 6 high quality applications per week, then keep to that. That is far better than sending out 50 substandard applications, and it will yield you results faster. Yeah. Any other questions? No?
You mentioned something about Fast Track?
Fast Track, yes. So the Fast Track service is a service that we offer to check resumes and cover letters. So you can access that via Blackboard. There's details on our website on how to do that. So you just upload your documents onto Blackboard and a career advisor will review them and get you some feedback. Okay? Excellent. All right, key selection criteria. Has anyone applied for a job where you had to respond to specific key selection criteria? A couple of you? Yep. So if you're reading a job ad and it refers you to a position description, and that position description has within it some key selection criteria, you need to send 3 documents as part of your application. You need to send the cover letter responding to the job ad, you need to send your resume tailored to that specific job, and you also need to attach a 3rd document which is responding to the key selection criteria as stated within the position description. Your application will not be considered if you fail to do any of those things properly. Okay, it's part and parcel of the process. It's also usually laid out in clear instructions that that's what you need to do, so failure to do so would also indicate that you're perhaps not able to follow instructions, which is not usually an attribute employers are seeking. If you're not sure whether or not you need to respond to the key selection criteria in a separate document, I would suggest that you probably do so anyway. If there's key selection criteria there to be addressed, that's probably a good way to do it. Not all positions will include key selection criteria, but when they do, as I've said, you must address it. You also need to address all of the key selection criteria. So you might read through it and say, I meet 5 of the 6 requirements, so I'll just address those 5. It will stand out like a sore thumb that you missed one of them off. Okay? If you don't have something or you don't meet the criteria, in your responses, demonstrate how you'd quickly be able to gain that specific skill or requirement, or what you're doing already to gain it. So it might be that you need to have a degree and you've not yet completed your studies, but you're due to complete at the end of semester 1 next year. So that's what you would put in response to that key selection criteria. It's best just not to ignore it. So key selection criteria are really around the skills, the standards, the competencies, and generally the requirements for the role. So they are what employers use to weight candidates to decide when shortlisting who to interview and who not to. So the higher the weighting, the better that you demonstrate you meet the selection criteria, the higher the likelihood of you being a shortlisted candidate and achieving an interview. So it's really a very important part of the process. Down the bottom there are some examples of key selection criteria. I actually think that I might show you an example of what it looks like within a position description. So just on the Swinburne website, I'm going to look at the jobs at Swinburne. I'm going to search and apply for a job. Maybe I'll find something better. Job search, here we go. So I'll look at professional administrative roles. So there's a position at the moment for an administrative assistant. So if I click on the position description, for those of you that haven't seen one before, when it comes up, so this is what the position description looks like. It gives you some details at the top regarding the role. It tells you the purpose of the position and where it's located. It lays out the key responsibilities. So you can see it's far more detailed than a job ad is going to be. And it gives you a really good idea of the scope of the role and where it sits in terms of the larger organisation. Then they've listed the Swinburne behaviours, and here we get to the key selection criteria. So you'll see they've got some subsections in terms of qualifications and experience, and they are telling you whether those are essential or preferable. Okay. So if I was responding to this particular job ad, what I would be doing and what I would urge all of you to do when you're responding to key selection criteria and a position description is have a third document that says responses to key selection criteria, write out each of the key selection criteria in bold and put your answer underneath. If they have given you a page limit, stick to it. If they've given you a word limit, stick to it. Okay, usually 1 or 2 paragraphs is sufficient, depending on the role. Okay, so then they've got the knowledgeable and then another as well. You need a working with children check for this role. It says essential. So for example, if that was a criteria that you didn't meet, you could put that you have applied for one, or that you will apply for one. Okay, to address that criteria if that's something you didn't meet. Has anyone got any questions about that?
How long would you say was like a response to each one?
Usually 1 or 2 paragraphs. It depends on what the key selection criteria is.
Yeah.
So if it's asking you, like for example, must have a bachelor's degree in business, 1 or 2 sentences is probably going to address that. If it's asking you to demonstrate key leadership skills in a multidisciplinary environment, it's probably going to take a little bit longer because you're going to have to use a specific example.
How many examples should you use?
For each one, generally 1 specific example. Yeah, so if they ask you a question about leadership, for example, use an example of how you've demonstrated leadership in the past. Don't tell them what leadership is. I've seen that a lot on key selection criteria. Someone will give a definition of what it is. They already know that. They want to hear about how you can demonstrate it. And also bearing in mind that you're responding to these key selection criteria to demonstrate to them how you're going to be successful in this position. So you're really selling yourself and the skills that you offer. So if you can bear that in mind and write it from that point of view, it will help as well. Any other questions? Yep.
So if you're responding to the key selection criteria on a separate document, do you then get rid of, say, if you've mentioned similar selection criteria in your skills section in your resume?
I wouldn't. Yeah, it's okay to repeat yourself a couple of times because it's all sort of along the same thread and backing yourself up. If, for example, it asks for communication skills in the job ad, you're going to address that in the cover letter. It will also probably be one of the key skills you've got mentioned on your resume. And then if there's a specific key selection criteria asking you about communication skills, that's when you talk about a particular example of how you've demonstrated and used them in the past. So it's all of the same theme. It's okay to use the same example in multiple documents and again in the interview, but it is better if you've got multiple experiences to draw on. If you are using the same example, I'd consider trying to word it slightly different as well so it's not overly repetitive. It's a really good question though. I get asked that a lot actually, yeah. Any other questions? No. So as you respond to each, give specific examples using the STAR method, which I'll talk about in a moment. Does anyone know what the STAR method is?
Situation, task, action, result.
Excellent. So for those of you that didn't hear, it's talking about the situation, the task, the action and the result. So bland statements will not cut it when it comes to addressing key selection criteria. And there is a handout available to you called Online Applications and Selection Criteria, which will talk a bit more and give some specific examples on how to address some common key selection criteria. All right, interviews. Who's been to a job interview before? Most of you, excellent. Who's been to a group interview? They're fun, aren't they? No, not a single person's nodded their head. What kind of jobs were they for?
Retail.
Yep. Hospitality.
Mine was for an internship.
For an internship?
Yeah, and I wouldn't even call it a group because it was just 2.
2 of you? Yep, so it's probably a bit more like an assessment centre. So I'll go through all these. I'll talk about group interviews first. So group interviews are quite often used in bulk recruitment exercises. So when an employer is seeking a number of candidates for a number of positions. So you'll see these happening in retail, especially if there's a new store opening. Call centres is another big one, hospitality as well. There'll be lots happening at the moment as places recruit Christmas staff as well. So with a group interview, there might be 20 of you in the room, there might be 30, there might be 40. It really depends on how they're running their sessions. And there's usually at least 1 or 2 assessors, perhaps more depending on the numbers. And the structure of a group interview usually talks about what the roles are, a little overview of the company, and then it gets you to do what I'm sure are really super fun activities and to see how you interact with others. Those of you that have been to group interviews, what are some of the things they made you do?
They gave us a product and we had to sell the product to every other group.
Yep. Excellent. Sell a paperclip. Yep.
Had to build a product.
You had to build a product. Excellent. What did they give you to build it?
Some pipe cleaners, paper plates, a little bit of glue, some textures,
Yeah.
little bits and pieces like that.
How successful were you?
I got the job.
Yeah, excellent. So the reason I asked you that is it's not actually about what you built. What they would have been assessing is the process that you and your group went through in order to achieve that. So were you inclusive of others? How did you communicate? Who perhaps showed natural leadership? So on and so forth. Some other activities at group interviews?
We were split. When I applied for a job in an assessment centre, we were split into 2 groups, and in each of our groups we had to make a list of the most important things for surviving on the moon.
Oh.
Yes.
Spacesuit, number 1?
I don't think that was on the list.
It's an interesting one. So again, it's about your thought process. They're not assessing whether or not you would actually be able to survive on the moon. They're assessing what thought process and problem-solving skills you use to come up with that list. That's a really good example. One of my favourite ones that I used to do when we ran group interviews was to pair people up and get them to stand with their backs to each other and get one person to describe a picture and someone else to draw it. So it was about communication skills, and it was quite interesting watching how frustrated people would get with each other, particularly when they saw the end picture. One-on-one interviews. Who's been to a one-on-one interview? Yeah, it's a very common style of interviewing. That's where you're the candidate and there's one person interviewing you. That person could be from HR, they could be your direct line manager, the person that you're reporting to, they could be the department manager. Sometimes when you're applying for a job, you have a series of one-on-one interviews. So I know for a previous role that I had, my first interview was with the branch manager, then I had a one-on-one with the state manager, and then I had a one-on-one with the CEO of the company. And that's how they did their recruitment process. One-on-one interviews can take on many forms. They can be quite formal at a set time. It could be over the phone. It could be over coffee. They could invite you out for lunch. But make no mistake about it, regardless of the setting, it is a job interview. And that person has some impact on the decision as to whether or not you're a successful applicant. Over the phone interviews. Anyone done one of these? So what are some of the cons of doing a telephone interview? You don't get to see the person. So we lose that communication that happens through body language, don't we? So voice and tone actually become really, really important when you're doing a phone interview. What else? What are some of the other...
They catch you out at the worst times.
Catch you at the worst times? Yeah.
I had a job interview the day, 2 days after my dad died. It was really,
Yeah, so it's really hard because, I mean, do you tell them? Do you just get on with it knowing that you're probably not going to be able to give your best performance? That's a really tricky situation. Yeah. What are some other cons?
Bad reception.
Sorry?
Bad reception.
Bad reception, yeah, at both ends sometimes as well. Yeah. What are some of the pros then of a telephone interview?
You don't have to go anywhere.
You don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to get dressed for an interview, which is sometimes some of the stressful part. You don't have to think about what to wear. You don't have to get there, which can also be a stressful part of the interview as well. You just need to make sure that you're answering the phone at the right time and that it's relatively quiet. What are some the other pros, perhaps, of a telephone interview? Or tell me about your experiences.
Well, I guess you can have some dot points as a guide.
Yeah.
Not to read them, but just to go through them.
It's a really good idea. Yeah, and I'd also encourage you, if it's a scheduled phone interview and you know it's happening, have your application in front of you to remind yourself what the key selection criteria is and what you've told them about yourself, because that's what they'll be questioning you about. Panel interviews. Anyone been to a panel interview before? Yeah. Absolutely. Do you want to tell us what panel interviews are?
Well, when you get interviewed by 2 or more people.
Absolutely. So you're the only...
All of them shoot questions.
They do shoot questions. That's a hand gesture. They shoot questions at you. It does feel like that, doesn't it? Yeah. So a panel interview is where you're the only candidate in the room, but there's 2 or more people there interviewing you. When I went for my job interview here at Swinburne, I was interviewed by a panel of 7. So that's not daunting at all. And they did it in a boardroom, so they were all sitting around a table, and they made me come in this back door and sit on a chair here, and they all just stared at me. Okay? So it can be really quite nerve-wracking, because the difficult thing with the panel interview is you're not just trying to build rapport with one person, you need to build it with all 7 people in the room. All of them are there because they have some say in whether or not you're the successful applicant. So there are some benefits though to a panel interview. It can eliminate that need for multiple one-on-one interviews up the chain, like the example I gave earlier. It can mean, in most cases, it's quite set out to be fair and equitable. They've decided what questions they're going to ask all candidates. All candidates will generally get asked the same questions in the same order by the same people. And before you've walked into the room, they will have decided who's asking what. One of the biggest tips that I can give you for a panel interview is when you're answering your question, start by answering looking at the person that asked you the question, scan the room to make eye contact with everybody else, and finish your answer by looking back at the person that asked you the question. That is the biggest tip that I can give you, because that's going to ensure that you're building rapport, eye contact and positive body language with everybody in the room. It's really, really easy to seek out the friendliest face and look at that person the entire way, but it's probably not the best way to impress the other members on the panel. So that's one thing that I would strongly suggest that you consider. Group interviews we've spoken about. Video interviews. Anyone done an interview via video before? Yep.
Yes, I have. I've done it several times.
Several times?
For several different jobs. Do you want me to talk about
Was it Skype? Was it pre-recorded?
Pre-recorded.
Yep.
One was the Skype where I could do it live over video, but everything else was pre-recorded.
Yep. So more and more graduate recruiters are using video interviewing as a way of making a decision in terms of shortlisting candidates. They're using video interviewing techniques because it allows them to interview more people, which they feel gives them a greater likelihood of finding a right fit for their organisation. So what employers are tending to do, and I'm talking about some of the larger graduate recruiters particularly, is once they've received your initial applications and whittled it down a little bit, they will send you a link to answer a couple of interview questions. PwC last year or the year before asked 2 questions. What is your passion? Why do you want to work for us? And so students had 48 hours to record themselves answering those questions and to then send the link back. They're then viewed by a real person and weighted according to your responses. Yeah?
With those kinds of things, does it matter so much about the quality of your camera?
Not so much. I mean, they will be looking, it depends whether they're video in terms of just voice or whether they're looking at you as well. They need to be able to hear and understand what you're saying, so the quality, I guess, of the microphone is important. They're also assessing how professional you can be in that setting, because more and more business meetings are being conducted via video, via Skype. All our phones here at Swinburne, when you dial someone, a video of them pops up, which can be a good and a bad thing, depending on what they're doing at the time. So it's becoming the way that the business world works. So they'll be making an assessment on that as well. So certainly don't go out and buy yourself a new phone or a camera or anything else like that to do it on, but what I would suggest is finding a quiet space where there's not a lot of distraction and doing it there. Yeah. You can always go to your local library as well. Most of them will have computers that will have cameras that you can do that on if you're really struggling. Other video interviews could be interviews via Skype. They might happen, especially if the interview that you're going for is for a position overseas, or perhaps even interstate. Some companies will use Zoom meetings, others, there's lots of different software programs out there that they might use. But video interviewing is something that you need to be aware of and perhaps be prepared for as well. What do you think might be some of the difficulties that you'd face in doing a video interview?
The connection quality might not be very good and you might get frequent dropouts.
Interruptions, yep.
Interruptions.
Absolutely. I did a really good video interview with a candidate once, and he thought the interview had finished and that we'd turned off the camera. He was all dressed up in a suit, got up to walk away, just had boxer shorts on. Luckily I found it kind of funny. But, you know, so just be careful as well, is what I'm saying. Be aware that, yeah, the interview doesn't actually end until everything is turned off. Make sure that happens. I've also heard a few swear words after they thought the interview was over, but their microphone's still on, which can be good or bad depending on what the context of it. So, depends. All right, first impressions really count with a job interview. We all make judgments of people before they've even opened their mouth when we meet someone for the first time, whether we do it consciously or not. It's just a fact of life. So in most cases, interviewers are already going to have an impression of you based on your application and their conversation with you over the phone in order to organise that interview, and perhaps through email communication as well if that's been happening. If your interview is face-to-face, or even if it's over the phone or via video, make sure you're there on time. Be ready. Okay? Generally, I'll say arrive 5 to 10 minutes early. Don't get there too early. It's great to show that you're keen, but there is such a thing as too keen. And certainly don't be late, not even by 30 seconds. Okay, so if you've worked out perhaps what train's going to get you there on time, catch the one earlier. It's best to get there half an hour earlier and then go for a walk around the block or sit and have a coffee and reread your application than it is to walk in there a minute or two late. Just, you'll be stressed out and that won't bode well either for the start of the interview. Practice your handshake. It's common practice in businesses, especially at interviews when you're introducing someone, to shake their hand. So I'm going to get you all to stand up. And I want you to shake hands with 3 other people in the room. Practice again. Practice again. While you're there, have a little stretch if you like.
Plate to the right. Thanks for coming in. Thanks very much. Well, half of the plates are there now.
Oh, okay. Excellent. All right, so I hear that you had a little bit of practice earlier as well, so now you should all be handshake experts. That's good. Try to address them by name. Generally here in Australia, first name is typical and that's okay to address them by their first name. Part of your preparation for the interview should be knowing who's interviewing you. Okay? If you don't have that information, call ahead and find out. Speak to reception. If you do know who's interviewing you, look at their LinkedIn profile. Okay? Check them out. Who are they? How long have they been there? What's their background? That's going to help you feel more comfortable when you're talking to that person. Dress and grooming. So general rule of thumb is to dress one step above what the position would normally require. Okay, so for example, here at Swinburne, it's generally accepted to wear sort of smart casual. Certainly I wore a suit to my job interview here. The one exception to that rule is if you're going into a corporate environment, you can't really go a step above that. So stick to the sort of suit or corporate attire for those types of job interviews. If in doubt, white shirt or blouse, black pants will usually look pretty professional regardless of the role if you're really not sure what to wear or don't have anything more corporate. I did once interview someone for a factory hand job and I told him to dress up for the interview and he presented in a tuxedo. True story. True story. I was impressed with his enthusiasm and the effort that he went to. Have an introduction ready. Did you do elevator pitches earlier? Yes. Yep. Excellent. There you go. Be ready to introduce yourself. Keep it positive and make sure that you're talking clearly. Who gets really nervous in job interviews? Yeah. Happens to the best of us. Yeah, I spend my job coaching other people on job interviews. So when I go in there, I think, well, I can't make any mistakes because then they're going to think I don't know even how to do my job yet. Why do we get nervous? What are some of the reasons?
Because we care.
Sorry?
Because we care.
Because we care, yeah. I actually, might be a bit sadistic of me, but as a recruiter, I liked seeing a little bit of nerves. To me, it showed that you were vested in the position and that you actually cared about the outcome. It was when people sort of swanned in and were overly confident that I thought they couldn't care less whether they get this job or not. So a little bit of nerves can actually be a positive thing. The problem with nerves, though, is when it impacts on your ability to actually interview well. When you're so nervous that you can't answer the questions that are asked, or you have so many nervous behaviours perhaps going on, like tapping your foot, twirling your hair, shaking your hands, all sorts of things that people do when they're nervous, usually subconsciously, and it's distracting from what you're actually saying. Another thing that happens when people are nervous is that they quite often will talk very softly. So you can only be assessed on what they hear you say, so it's important that you're speaking at a level that they can hear that. Non-verbal is really, really important as well. So your body language should be positive. I interviewed a gentleman once who actually sat on a chair like this and stared at the ceiling for the whole interview, and then rang me up and was quite aggressive the following week when he found out he wasn't the successful applicant. So generally what I consider, or what I suggest if you're unsure how to sit in a job interview, sit on the chair, hands in your lap, body slightly forward. Not leaning right into them, but just slightly forward, and looking at the person asking you the questions. That shows them that they have your full attention. If you are somebody who shakes your hands and does all those sort of things, perhaps when you're nervous, tuck them under. Tuck them under to stop you from doing that. Does anyone have any questions about interviews in general? We're going to talk about some of the questions that you might get asked. Yeah.
What are some of the indicators that you can try and find from the people interviewing you, whether or not they're enthusiastic about hiring you midway into the interview?
One thing that I would say is that if you feel that they're picking on you, so if they've asked you a question, for example, about your communication skills and you've given an example, and they're asking you for more and more detail about that specific example, when you're being interviewed, that can really feel that they're trying to catch you out on something. It can actually show that they're genuinely interested and they're wanting to explore that further. So that can actually be a positive sign. Most of the time you're not going to know in terms of positive indicators. It's one of those things. If they're good at their job, you're not going to know. The biggest thing you can do to make it a positive experience is try to build rapport. So if you feel that, you know, they were friendly, they smiled, you shook hands at the end, you walk out of the interview and thinking, okay, that went okay, you've probably done all right. There's also so many factors outside of your control. You don't know who the other candidates are. You don't know what their strengths and abilities are or what their previous experience are. And you don't know the inner workings of the organisation either in terms of their decision-making processes. So there are lots of parts of that process that aren't personal to you that impact on whether or not you're successful as well. All you can do is put your best foot forward, try to have a positive interview experience, and leave it at that. What I would say as well, and I didn't touch on this, if you're unsuccessful, what would you do?
Ask how you could do it better.
Yeah, absolutely. Ask for feedback. Most employers are going to be really quite diplomatic and just say it was a strong candidate pool and unfortunately we've gone with someone with more experience or a higher qualification than you. 9 times out of 10 that's the absolute truth. What they're not going to say to you is you really fidgeted and I couldn't hear what you were saying and therefore you didn't get the job. They're going to be diplomatic rather than brutally honest. Most employers say if you show a genuine interest in getting some feedback, we'll spend some time with you and letting you know perhaps what you could do better next time. Perhaps your answers sort of didn't go into enough depth. Maybe it was a really strong candidate pool and they can suggest some professional development that you could do to increase your chances in the future, and things like that. Ask to be considered for any other positions that might become available. Okay, their first choice may not accept the role, or they may accept and then take something else. rather than going through that entire recruitment process again, they're probably going to go to the second person on the list, which very well could have been you. So it's good to keep that positive relationship happening as well. Send them an email to thank them for their time for interviewing you. Okay? Most candidates will not do this. I can probably count on one hand in my year, for 8 years as a recruiter, the number of candidates that actually did, but I could tell you their names. They weren't always successful, but they stayed in my mind because they went that extra step further. So it's a really positive thing to do. And it also opens up those lines of communications for other roles. They might know someone else in their network who is recruiting for a similar role, and they might refer you to that person. You don't know what opportunities might exist, so keep that line of communication open. All right, we're going to talk about different types of interview questions. So you've got general types of questions, behavioural-based questions, situational and thinking style questions, and then there's also the industry-specific questions. There is a handout called Common Interview Questions. There's one called STAR Methodology, which talks about that STAR model, which I'll speak about in a moment. And there's also one on interview insights and interview etiquette that can give you much more information than I've sort of just covered quite briefly. Just checking the time. All right. Okay, tell me about yourself. This is a general interview question that is usually asked at the start of the interview. You will have met the person in the foyer, you would have shook hands, you would have introduced yourself, you've gone into the room, they've asked you to take a seat, you sit down. Do you find us okay? Yes. Is it nice outside? Yes. Okay, tell me about yourself. Okay. This is where you can use your elevator pitch. In my experience, people that don't prepare for the question, tell me about yourself, tell me all sorts of things. Pets' names, holidays, what mum and dad do, what primary school they went to. I'm not asking for an autobiography. I'm asking you to tell me about yourself in a professional sense. Remember, this is usually the first question, so it's also setting the tone for the interview. So what I might get you to do is to turn to the person next to you or behind you or whoever's closest and just practice your elevator pitch. If they were to ask you the question at interview, tell me about yourself. And I'll give you a few moments to do that. Don't all talk at once. Oh, did you do it already? All right. If you've done it already, we'll skip over that one. That's fine. I won't make you do it again. If anyone wants to come practice on me later, you can. Behavioural-based questions. Has anyone heard of this style of interviewing before?
Yes.
Yep. So 85% of graduate recruiters use behavioural-based questions. More and more employers generally are using them as well. And so the idea of behavioural-based questions is that by getting you to talk about how you've behaved in a specific situation in the past is a really good indicator of future behaviour in similar situations. So the types of behavioural-based questions that employers ask, how might you prepare for those?
I would say just think about times.
Yeah.
Yeah, that you've done what they're asking.
So my biggest tip to you would be for behavioural-based questions, when you walk into an interview, know that you're going to be asked some. Have examples ready that demonstrate the key selection criteria, because most of the behavioural-based questions are going to be based around skills and competencies that were already addressed in the key selection criteria already, and they're just exploring those further. Okay? So that's where you're going to use that STAR model and talk about specific examples. So as you said, have examples ready to talk about. If you can diversify from the examples that you used in your key selection criteria document, great. If those are the best examples that you have and you feel most comfortable talking about those, that's okay as well. So behavioural-based questions really form part of a competency-based interview, so it's really assessing how well you would be able to perform the job and where your skills and competencies sit in terms of the level that is required for the role. So this is an example of a behavioural-based question that was asked for a graduate job in engineering design, and it was describe a time when you have worked in a team. So this person's actually talked about the situation of working in a team on commercial engineering design projects. Ideally, they'd tell me where that team was, so whether it was part of perhaps an industry-based learning or professional placement that they did, or whether it was part of a project. what the task was. So the task was to develop a prototype of a solar cooker for commercial use in outdoor camping and a refugee camp. Action. Meet as a team to develop a project plan including team member responsibilities, etc. Develop a prototype in a systematic and equitable manner by due date. Now, I actually don't particularly like that action, how they've described it there. Why do you think that might be?
Too inspecific.
They're talking about the team. I'm not interviewing the team, I'm not hiring the team, I'm interviewing you. So what I would expect is for you to tell me that as a team, perhaps I participated in the team to develop a project plan. I did this, this and that as part of that project plan. These are the responsibilities that I took on. This is what I did. I'm interested in your actions. Especially when we're talking about group-based questions. When I do mock interviews with students and they talk about group assignments, it's always we. We did this and we did that. I want to hear what you actually did. What responsibilities did you take on and what part did you play in the outcome? Which brings us to the result. Quite often people will talk very well about the situation, task and action, but they won't tell us what the outcome was. That's really quite important because we need to know whether or not your actions were successful for that particular situation. Now, if the example that you're talking about doesn't have an overly positive result, talk about what you learnt from the situation and what you would do differently next time. Ideally, in an interview situation, you would use positive outcome examples, but sometimes that's not always the case. Perhaps if you're talking about a conflict resolution situation or negotiation skills, for example. So you talk about what you learnt from that particular experience and what you would have gained from it. So this one we will practice. Tell me about a time when you demonstrated initiative. So using that STAR model, which I'll go back here so that you can see it's situation, task, action and result. With the person behind you, next to you, however you wish to do it, ask them to tell you about a time that they demonstrated initiative. All right. How'd we go? I love that you're all talking. Was everyone able to think of an example? Eventually. Oi! That always works. Was everyone able to think of an example? Yep. How would you go in an interview situation if you were asked that?
Unless I had an example prepared beforehand.
What would you, oh, that brings me back earlier talking about interviews. What would you do in an interview if they asked you a question and you absolutely had no idea how to answer it? What would you do? Yeah?
I would say probably asking for time.
Yeah. If you're really, really struggling, it's okay to say, I can't think of an answer right now. Is it okay if we return to this question later? Okay. It's also absolutely okay to take a deep breath, to pause and count to 10 before you start talking. It's going to feel like eternity to you, but in reality, it's not a great deal of time. And they can see that you're thinking. Okay, so those are two techniques that you can use if that happens. Okay. Lunch is here, so I'm going to shoot through. Interview do's. So in summary, use their name, be clear about what it is that you have to offer. The interview is sort of like the final piece of the puzzle in terms of selling yourself. It's a TV advert. Okay? Anticipate what questions they're going to ask you, and you can do that by rereading the job ad and your application prior to the interview. Prepare thoroughly. So review all of those documents, think about what you're going to wear, think about how you're going to get there, do some research on the company, find out who's interviewing you and have a look at their profile as well. Answer the question asked, even if it's something that you don't really want to talk about. Okay, the biggest mistake that I see people making in interviews is they don't actually answer the question that was asked. They tell me about a lot of different other things, but it's really important that you do answer that particular question. They're asking it for a reason. Have the question clarified if it's not clear. That can be another way as well to get extra time, as we were just talking about, if you're not sure what to say. If you're trying to hurriedly think of an answer, you could ask them to repeat the question to buy yourself a little bit extra time. Project confidence and enthusiasm. You're the product, you need to be confident in your ability. If you are not, they will not be either. Okay. Prepare some questions to ask them. So usually what I say to students is there are 2 types of questions you can ask. One about the particular job and some about the organisation. And what I would suggest is that you have 3 questions to ask about the job and 3 questions to ask about the organisation ready to go before you walk in there. Chances are they will answer a couple of them throughout the interview process, but that will still at least give you 1 or 2 questions to ask at the end. So questions about the job might be things like, who would I be reporting to? If I was a successful applicant, what would my first day look like? What are the main priorities of this particular role? How big's the team that I would be working in? Okay, assuming those things have not already been answered. Questions about the organisation could be, what are the lead priorities for the organisation over the next 5 years? How does this role fit into the mission statement of the organisation? And questions like that. Okay. Make sure the information that you're looking at on their website and LinkedIn and whatever else you might be doing research is up to date and current. Okay. I remember going for an interview once with the CEO, and she said, "Oh, do you have any questions for me?" And I said, "Yes, I know that you've got 8 branches in New South Wales, 18 in Queensland, and about 6 down here in Victoria. Do you have any plans to expand?" She said, "I closed the New South Wales ones 3 years ago." I said, "It's not what your website says." So I think her website person got in trouble that day. I still got the job. Clearly she was impressed that I'd done the research, but the information wasn't up to date. At the end of the interview, thank them for their time, and as I said earlier, follow up with an email and make a positive final impression, especially if you feel that first impression perhaps wasn't so great. A good final impression can sort of make up some ground. So shake hands, smile, thank them for their time, and leave. Be polite to the reception staff and everyone else that you see along the way as well. Yep.
With the follow-up email, is it polite to do it the same day or the next day?
Either. Yep. Either. Wouldn't send it from the foyer as you're leaving. But I think, a couple of hours later is probably okay. The next day would be absolutely fine. Anywhere within the next 3 days, I would think, is probably okay. Depends on how quickly their turnaround is. Sometimes they'll make a decision that day. So I'd probably suggest the next day, if not later on that same day. Don'ts. So don't answer simple questions with a yes or no. Are you excited about the prospect of working with our organisation? Okay. Provide an answer. Don't make derogatory remarks or negative comments about any of your previous past employers, people that you've worked with, university lecturers. Rather than making, look, you may have had a negative experience and what you're saying may actually be true, but at the end of the day it's from your perspective. And if you're talking negatively about previous employers or education experiences, it's going to reflect on you as being a negative person. That employer is also going to be concerned, perhaps in the future, what you might say about their organisation in a public space. So it's best just to avoid it. Be diplomatic. Yeah?
I've had an interview question before when they ask, how have you resolved a conflict or what's your response to a conflict? And it's hard to mention a conflict without the situation being negative.
Yeah, so if they're asking you a particular question, then you sort of need to talk about the situation. But I guess you don't need to go into the absolute depths of who was right, who was wrong, and so forth. But yeah, absolutely, it would be appropriate in that situation to talk about that. It's best not to ask questions about remuneration in the job interview. It's best to have those conversations once they've already decided it's you that they want. You're in a much stronger position of negotiating power. For a lot of graduate positions, there is no negotiating to be done. It may be quite a set salary, especially if it's a graduate program. If you're going into a council, state government or a university, it will also usually be set based on their EBA. If it is with a private employer and salary is not negotiable, think about other things that you could ask for. Laptop, phone, flexible leave, holidays, extra days off, flexible work hours. There's lots of things that you can negotiate if salary is something that can't be moved.
What happens if they ask you, what do you expect to get paid?
Then it's best to give a range. So part of your interview preparation should be having a general understanding of what that position is worth in terms of market value. There's lots of online resources that will give you an idea of that. And it's best to give a range probably of around $10,000. Yep.
Is
this is probably unique to my situation, but what if you get accepted for an interview and assuming you're successful, they want you to start within like a week or so, but within that week you'll be like you've got a planned holiday for a few months. What should you do?
Tell them. You need to be honest with them and
Yes,
say, I'm very excited about this position. I'd love to start with you. However, I've already got a holiday planned. Is there any chance I could commence the position in February or whenever it is that you're back? If you are the person that they want, that's going to be okay.
But what I'm trying to say is, will the employer mind so much, or
It depends on the situation of the employer. It depends on the personal context. It depends on how quickly they need that position filled. All sorts of things. So it's a conversation though that you need to have with that particular employer, and it's best to be honest and upfront.
Is it common, or is it
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
that happens?
No, it's common, especially this time of year. Yep, absolutely. Yep.
What would you do if you were given a job opportunity today, but tomorrow you got another interview?
Yep.
And
So it's really up to you. Usually you'll have a preference as to which job you prefer to do. In that situation, what I'd probably do is thank them for their offer and ask if I could have 48 hours to consider it. That will allow you time to go to the other interviews so that you'll find out more about that position. You can make a judgment as to which one you prefer. At the end of that interview, you could suggest to them that you already have an offer on the table. However, you'd be very interested in working for their company. How quickly are they hoping to make a decision? Just lay it out. There's also, although it's not considered polite business etiquette per se, just because you would accept an offer, if a better one comes along, just be honest with that first company. Call them up and say, you know, I've accepted your offer. However, there was another employer that I was really interested in working for and was my first choice, and I've accepted another offer from them. I'm sorry I won't be able to commence in your role. Be honest, have those conversations. The worst you can do is just ignore it and not rock up on your first day, okay? Because then you're burning all your bridges. All right, pizza's coming. I'm going to wrap it up. All right, learn from your interview experiences. So each one is a learning situation. When you walk out of there, if there's one question that they really got you on that you walk out of and go, oh, didn't answer that so well, write it down in your phone, practice it for next time. Speak to somebody. Ring and ask why for feedback. Ask to be kept in mind for similar roles. I'm not going to talk... Oh, referees, quickly. You have some. Rule number 1, have some. Have at least 2. Ideally work in nature, but if not, academic is okay as well. Choose people that are going to talk positively about you. Let those people know that you've been to an interview for XYZ job. That's going to put them in a better position to provide an accurate reference. That's part of the coaching process. Make sure their contact details are accurate and up to date. And make sure they know that they can perhaps expect that call. Most employers won't do reference checks until after the interview stage, and they'll only reference their first choice or perhaps their top 2 or 3 if they're still trying to make a decision between those 2 or 3 candidates. I'm not going to talk about global careers. We have information about that on our website. There's also information on Swin Employer. If any of you are planning on working overseas in the future, I just want to point out Going Global to you that you can access via Swin Employer. There are positions advertised on there in a lot of different overseas countries, as well as internships, etc. I'm going to stop there because I hear the pizzas out there, and I'm sure you're all very keen to have a break after this morning's session. Thank you so much for listening. I'll stay up here for a few moments if anyone's got any specific questions.